Yeah, if there would be a crypto president position, I would vote for you, Kenny.
One of which on the debt side.
We don't need any banks or any intermediaries, right?
It's actually the fastest ZK proving chain.
Everyone was talking into the tap economy kind of a thing.
The Web3 space is so challenging.
Thanks for joining. I mean, it's a pleasure for me to talk to you today. And to begin with, just let us know what is the Manta Network and what benefits it brings to the crypto industry.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for letting me join. The pleasure is all mine. So really excited to be here. I'm Kenny. I'm one of the co-founders of Manta Network, which is the largest modular L2 in the space. We've been building our scalability solutions and ZK solutions for the past 4 years now, starting in about 2020. We've got a team of around 65 people all over the world. And, there's a lot of exciting things going on in the ecosystem. And so really excited to chat about it, as well as just, any general industry trends.
Awesome. So just for the regular, not tech-savvy user to understand what it is all about and what you guys are working on, like what solution are you bringing to the market, can you maybe dive a bit deeper?
Yeah, sure. So anyone that's non-technical, right? How would I explain this? Essentially, in blockchain, there is currently a major issue, and that major issue is scalability, which is just defined as how many people can you serve without things lagging or becoming a user experience problem, right? So it's like if I own a coffee shop and, if there's only 2 customers in the coffee shop, I can serve them both just fine. But if now all of a sudden there's 100 people coming to the coffee shop, it's very hard for me to serve them with just, one waiter and one barista. And so I have to scale up my operations, hire more people, the costs go up and everything and all that stuff, right? And so we're seeing that same problem play out in the crypto space, because people in the space like to say, oh, we want to target the next billion users. But the reality is, just like the coffee shop that in my example can't handle 100 customers, crypto blockchain right now can't handle 1 billion users. And so the question is, how can you build the right foundation in a way so that it can handle that next 1 billion users? And so solutions like Manta Network are out there to solve that problem.
So is it just a matter of number of transactions per second, or what is meant by you, when you say scalability?
Yeah, I think when you say scalability, there's a lot of different variables that go into it. I think one of the common sort of metrics that people look at when it comes to scalability is transactions per second, or TPS for short, right? And this has sort of been an industry standard, and it's been a standard for performance of machines and systems even before crypto. TPS is a pretty basic metric, basic KPI for scalability out there. So I do think that it's a very commonly used one, right? But then when it comes to actual TPS, right, there's a little bit of misnomer in that sense, because first is, there's theoretical TPS, which is, what the system could possibly do, versus real world TPS, which is what the system is truly capable of producing. And one analogy to this would be kind of like, if you guys look on the news about Tesla, right, like their cars have an estimated range when you charge it to full battery. But everyone who, uses a Tesla often complains that the estimated range versus the real range are entirely different. Exactly. So that's kind of the tricky part about TPS. It's a nice benchmark in terms of, what we need to look for in the industry and how we can measure scalability, but it can also be a little bit inaccurate because theoretical TPS doesn't necessarily match up with real world TPS.
Okay, got it. So basically the Manta Network is for the builders, right? And there are just a bit of confusion for regular users about all this kind of layers, layer 1, layer 0, layer 2, layer 3. Where you guys stand on this kind of a pie with different layers?
Sure. So in these layers, right, we're on the layer two side. And so when you look at layer one, you're thinking probably in this case, some solution like Ethereum. And so Ethereum has the scalability issues that layer twos like Manta and others are attempting to address. Layer threes are built on top of the layer twos. So, in theory, again, right, these layer threes are more application specific and achieve an even higher level of scalability than just the L2 itself. And it uses basically the same methodology as an L2. The way that the L2 scales the L1 is the way that the L3 scales the L2. And happy to get into detail about that. But for the sake of this high level sort of org chart, right? Like the L3 is just an app specific scalability layer of the L2. And the L2 was originally intended to be more of like a general purpose scalability layer of the L1. But now we're seeing a lot of app specific L2s as well.
Yeah, but in 2016, 2017, when I was explaining blockchain to many users and like to attendees on the conferences, besides the speed, we were saying we don't need any banks or any intermediaries, right? Because we pay them a lot of money, right? And it's very slow. So the matter of money also comes into the negotiation. I mean, even for Ethereum, when you have to pay $2, $3, $4, $5, $7 equivalent for the gas, I mean, it wouldn't allow the huge mass adoption to come. For example, if I want to just send $20 to someone and I have to pay $4 for the transaction, that does cost a lot. What about like the economical kind of monetary solutions you guys provide? Like, is Manta a cheap network to do the transactions?
Yes, extremely cheap, comparable and sometimes even cheaper than Solana. And, it's funny because I see the exact same problem that you just described, especially around like, the first time I think we as an industry really saw this problem play out was with CryptoKitties back in like 2017 or 2018.
I remember those.
And yeah, it's one app just minting cats on the blockchain, like took down the entire network, right? And exploded gas fees. And then I think DeFi summer with like Uniswap and on-chain swapping, right? Like the transaction fees, I think in that case, the gas fees were around like $300 worth of ETH. Insane. And the joke was that we've replaced the middlemen with more middlemen. In this case, the middleman is Ethereum now. And so the scalability solutions make a huge difference here. And so when it comes to transacting on Manta, for example, right, doing a swap on one of our dexes is 0.08 cents. So it's $0.0008, right? So that makes microtransacting definitely very usable here because it's a fraction of a penny rather than having to deal in the dollar amounts for swaps on the L1.
Yeah, but I believe there's big competition between layer twos, right? And like, what differs different blockchains which are built on top of Ethereum one from each other? Because there's Polygon been for quite a while. There's other new networks are appearing on the market. Like, how the competitive space looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say dishonest if I didn't say that the space was highly competitive. And in fact, I don't think that there's too much of a significant differentiation between the L2s. And I say this because, at least what I'm seeing in the industry is, or at least my argument is, if there was such a clear delineation in terms of value proposition between the L2s, then the applications that are deploying would clearly choose the best L2 and only deploy on that and scale with that. But that's obviously not the case, right? We see a fragmentation of this market share across some apps that deploy different forks of themselves as different names on different chains, some that just purely go multi-chain. But at the end of the day, I think what we're seeing is the application layer and the users don't really differentiate between the L2s in terms of like any sort of value significance. there are nuances in terms of technology that's deployed, right? For example, whether you're an optimistic rollup or you're a ZK rollup, whether you use, some sort of off-chain or alternative chain DA, like Celestia, like we do, which keeps our gas fees low, or if you use Ethereum full settlement and proto-dank sharding to moderate some of those gas fees, right? So there are some technical nuances and differences there. But at the end of the day, I don't think that there's too much differentiation on the L2 side. And so the real question here becomes one of market share in ecosystem development, right? And so it really is something that is more core to community building and thinking about, okay, what communities do you want to go after? And how do you want to specialize those types of L2s for those communities? I think that's the true differentiator here. And so on Manta, right, like we, at least for this season, for the rest of the summer into fall, we are focusing specifically on building the meme culture. We think that that's a very powerful segment to get into because it really drives a lot of community building with real users. And happy to get into more detail about that, right? We've worked with, or we're working with Bonk currently. They're coming on to Manta. They're bringing their users onto Manta as well. We're seeing a lot of activity from native on-chain dexes like Gold Network, who are starting to support meme coin launches and all that stuff. And so I think that's been proven to be fairly successful in our case because we have seen a lot of positive sentiment from the community coming out there. And I think that we're starting to build that fledgling community and taking that market share. But ultimately, right, I think L2s are not competing on technology, but rather competing on community at this point. Because to your point, right, like there's so many out there. What's really the difference?
Exactly. So yeah, you mentioned the very right thing about the communities, right? So basically, as I understand this thing, that the blockchains are fighting for developers' attention, right? Because developers create the apps and they bring users, right? But do blockchains actually communicate with the final users? I mean, the individuals who use the apps, and like, what's the value for the final user who uses the token on different chains? What chain brings, what kind of value chain brings to the final user?
I think my understanding of your question is you're asking me, does an L2 like Manta communicate directly with the end users that actually interact with the applications on Manta? And the answer is yes, right? Like I think when it comes to things such as user experience, right, which is critical to obtaining and retaining users in any sort of ecosystem, the application layer, right, the apps that deploy on a network have a huge responsibility, and they have to make it as user friendly and as simple as possible. But the infrastructure layer also has a huge responsibility. And so because the infrastructure layer, right, projects like Manta have such a huge responsibility in this whole user experience journey for the end user, it is critical for us to communicate and understand the needs of the end user. Some of those things we can't change, we can't affect because, where a button is and how many clicks it takes to take a certain action, that's all application responsibility. But there are certain things that we can definitely impact, such as transaction fees. And so this is why Manta, we were actually the first and still the largest modular L2, right? We're the first to start using Celestia. And by using Celestia, we basically turned down the price of the transaction fees on the L2 so significantly. And this was before any other L2 was able to even use proto-dank sharding on Ethereum. And by switching over to Celestia DA, that impact on the user experience translated into a savings of $2 million in gas fees every single month. That's like 20 plus million over the course of a year saved on gas fees, right? And so that's a huge impact to user experience. If our community can save $20 million a month, that's amazing, right? So I do think it's critical for the infrastructure layer to not only communicate with the users, but to also understand the end user's needs and what part of that we can control for so that we can improve it.
There's a portion of end users who just interested in the token price, right? So it's a completely like a separate thing to discuss. What is the utility for your token, and like how you treat the listing, how successful it was, and like what the future updates and future utilities the token might bring that it will look promising in the end user's eyes, in the end trading user's eyes.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I can't really comment too much on the token. And as a project, right, like the token has taken up probably the past. So we launched it in January, and now it's like June, July. So it's taken up the past half year of the entire Manta lifetime, right? And the project, we've been building this for the past 4 years, since 2020. And so in reality, it's only a really small part of the entire history of Manta. And so, as we've always focused on continuing to build through bear markets, through bull markets, right? Like, and we've seen all those sort of crazy chapters. It's still what our main focus is as a team, right? Just continuing to build, continuing to ship. And I think that's one of our strongest points. We're able to adapt to the market. We're able to find, opportunities and kind of jump into those opportunities full steam ahead. And we're able to gather the respect and the cooperation of amazing partners, amazing collaborators, just like Bonk, right? Who's recently joined the Manta ecosystem to help us push in that direction. And so, in terms of Manta itself and its future, I think, we're the right team to kind of push some of those initiatives and the right community to continue to drive that in the right direction. In terms of the utility, right, the L2, the token itself has typical L2 governance utility as any other L2 in the ecosystem, right? It's used for any type of on-chain governance activity. It's used for a lot of the liquidity incentives. These are things that, we're also promoting through the Manta Foundation, which ultimately drive the growth of the ecosystem as well. We have a 50 million Manta Foundation ecosystem fund, and that's specifically dedicated towards deploying for incentives, co-marketing, investment, and all that other stuff that basically drives the community and the ecosystem forward.
Interesting how you work with the developers community. Can we talk a bit more about it? Maybe you can also highlight the most interesting projects, products which are built, inside the blockchain you guys building.
Yeah, sure. So we're extremely proactive with our community. I think that, a lot of the builders, a lot of the founders that are deployed on Manta would say that we're probably one of the most hands-on projects, ecosystems that they've worked with. And we're very proactive about ideas as well. And so, for example, when Goal Network, not Goal Network, when Bonk and Manta, we were in discussion about this whole sort of launch and everything, right? We were thinking, okay, how do we get our ecosystem projects involved in this? And so we listed out some ideas around the GameFi side. We listed some ideas around the DEX side and all this other stuff that I can't get into too much detail because it's all coming out later. But, as we're doing that, we're thinking, okay, which projects fit these sort of categories? And how can we introduce those projects into this whole sort of campaign? And so we proactively came up with the ideas, reached out to these projects, pitched them on this whole cooperative, right? And so now these projects are getting involved. They're working with each other. They're working with Bonk. They're working with us. And so it's a great experience, and it gives them a lot of exposure to the Manta community, to the Bonk community, and ultimately just positions them in a very great place to help grow and expand their own apps. So that's something we really take pride on. And I think one of the founders that I spoke to at a conference not too long ago back in Singapore was telling me that Manta is the only ecosystem group chat that they have, where there's more Manta team members in there than their own team members.
So there's a lot of effort from your
the BD guys.
Yeah, so there's a lot of effort from your side as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I think there's not that many. Just to finish that one, like what are the most interesting from your side products are built on Manta? Currently exist.
Oh,
you said that the bonk is coming to Manta as well, but yeah, it's been there on the market, but it has now the bigger exposure to your users and giving the better user experience in terms of like all the gas fees and the speed and everything and scalability. But what other projects you can mention which is built on Manta?
Yeah, there's quite a few growing native projects, right? One of which on the deck side is Goal Network. I kind of mentioned them on the bonk side as well. And the reason is because Goal Network is also building out tools that are unique for meme coins. And so this also goes into this whole sort of meme season. And those tools make it very easy for any sort of community member who wants to build this sort of community to launch a meme coin in a fair launch manner. And so all the burning, all the transparency, everything is already done directly through the contract. And all they need to do is deploy, come up with an amazing name, come up with a narrative, and then bam. And so that's been getting a lot of traction on the Goal Network side. And their launcher is they're going to be doing some fun campaigns with Bonk as well for that. And then on the GameFi side, one of the native projects on Manta that we're seeing that's very promising is called Elfin. They build very casual, low-key, simple games for people to play. Not as simple as just like tapping on your phone, the tap to earn, but it's still pretty dead simple. And we see a lot of on-chain user activity just with those games because they're so easy to play, easy to understand. There's no major learning curve. And frankly, some of them are kind of addictive. And I think a lot of our team members also play a lot of those games from time to time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure that there's not many people who watch this podcast who doesn't differentiate the Manta Atlantic from the Manta Pacific, but still, can you explain what are the main features of both?
Yeah, so Manta Atlantic is our Polkadot parachain, and so it's a layer 1. It's actually the fastest ZK proving chain in existence right now. Right. And so it's different from a ZK rollup because a ZK rollup just uses ZK methodology to batch transactions to make, scalability happen, essentially. We do the L1 has on-chain ZK proof generation. And this is for purpose of like things like identity verification, all that other stuff. And it is the fastest L1 that does this that's out on the market today. It's primarily used also for on-chain staking. And so any use of the Manta token for the security of the network is done through Atlantic. On the Pacific side, this is where we're the scalability layer, the L2, where all the ecosystem apps are deployed. And so if you're building an application using Solidity, if you're building on EVM, you deploy on Manta Pacific.
Awesome. And what about the team? How distributed the team is? I mean, do you guys have an office or you work on it? Because, when I worked at Binance, we were all decentralized. 99% of people were working from home, even though that Binance had a couple of offices in the countries where the license was established, How you guys work together? Yeah. You said there is a team of 60 plus people, right?
Exactly. Yeah. 60 plus core contributors. It's really funny because I often get asked the question, where's your headquarters? And we don't have a headquarters because everyone is distributed all over the place. I'd say for the most part, there's probably not 2 or 3 core team members in the same country. So, divide that by 60 total members. And, that's how many different countries were dispersed across.
And most of the people are developers or not? Like what portions of the things the people working on?
Yeah, 2/3 of the core team are developers. 1/3 is working on the operations, business development, marketing, more so on the foundation side, right? And I think it really speaks volumes because, you know, the 365 divided by three across that many countries, right? Like it's truly a global effort here. And I think that's really speaking to the whole ethos of decentralization.
But in terms of the geographies and the countries or regions where you guys are focused on, is there any like specific ones, or you're just serving the whole globe?
We're serving the whole globe. I think that we do have specific ones that we tend to start focusing on as well. And this is really the way that it happens is it truly starts off as more of like a grassroots effort. And then it develops into something where we say, okay, you know what, this is getting pretty big. And so we can, probably dedicate some resources here and just kind of help facilitate news, get people informed, maybe host local events, right? It really is on a case by case basis. And we're actually seeing this play out for Thailand currently. There's a huge local community happening in Thailand, and we're starting to focus a little bit of our effort more so in that region as well.
Awesome. I've been through the fundraising process, and we've been in the stage where funds are offering what they can bring into the table and trying to be very helpful. Did you feel the same way? I think you have been the very hot project on the market, and everyone wanted to invest, right? And probably you guys were. I just assuming that you guys were oversubscribed. Did you really, and do you really now get the support from the investors and the contributors and the angel investors, which they promised in the beginning, and like in which fields those support lies in?
Yeah, so it's really on a case by case basis, right? Like you get in bed with the right people and they're extremely helpful. Sometimes you get in bed with the wrong person and they're not as helpful as they claim to be. That's just the nature of relationships in and outside of VC, right? And so investors are, I think, no exception to that rule. In terms of help, especially as a founder, right? Especially as first-time founders, which many people are in the Web3 space, even if you're a previous founder of a startup, being a Web3 founder is a completely different beast. And this is coming from someone who has been a founder in startups, technology companies that are outside of Web3. And so I consider everyone kind of a first-time founder in Web3. You need a lot of help. And the help is not necessarily, right? Like when people think about help from investors, help from angels and all that stuff, the first thing that comes to mind is, hey, they've got to tweet about us. They've got to talk about us. They've got to write articles about us. But the reality is that if all the investors always did that for every single portfolio company that they invested in, then their thought leadership is useless, right? And so they're basically guns for hire, and VCs, investors, they're aware of this. So they're very selective about when they help and when they don't, especially in a public setting. But what we found extremely useful is when they help in a private setting. And so a lot of these things, such as recruiting the right talent, right? We need someone who has experience in DeFi and they're looking for new opportunities and they want to help us grow with the whole DeFi ecosystem on Manta, right? We go to a VC probably has like 20 different portfolio companies that are in the DeFi space, and they probably know some people that are looking for other opportunities and stuff, right? And so that's been extremely helpful. Thinking about how to recruit, how to be competitive, how to kind of grow your team, foster the culture, those types of things, I think, VCs have been extremely helpful on just based on our own experience. And depending on the kinds of venture capital friends you make in the space, some of them will become core contributors to your project as well. Right. And so we've had experiences where like the very technical teams of these VCs also come in and contribute direct code into our GitHub in order to help us with, some of the projects that we're building.
That's cool. That's really cool. It is really interesting how often do you guys need to roll out the new features, and how do you guys follow the roadmap? Because building a tech startup or blockchain even, you always face difficulties, right? And you might delay the roadmaps and all of that. And I'm just talking about my experience in other projects, right? And the community is unhappy about it. Did you guys have similar projects where you had to delay something, and how often do you have to, put something new for the community, for the users, for the developers, or if it works, it works,
Yeah, I mean, we have to do it all the time, right? Like, I think that the Web3 space is so challenging in terms of just sticking to one idea and going with it, right? One day it's DeFi, the next day it's NFTs, the next day it's AI, and the next day it's RWAs and all this other stuff, right? And so it's not about necessarily, I think like there's a taboo for projects to pivot from their roadmap because communities tend to like to see these projects stay consistent. But I think the reality is these projects have to think like a startup as well. And startups have to pivot in order to continue to create value for users, right? And ultimately, it's all about creating value. And otherwise, there's no point of that sort of existence. And so for us, right, the core technologies are already built out, which is very nice as a project because we don't have to worry about, whether our L2 is functional or not, or whether the components that we've built into it are functional or not. And the nice thing is that on the infrastructure level, the core technologies can stay consistent. And so our roadmap, for example, for implementing multi-DA is something that will be consistent regardless of what the industry is interested in at that time, right? Whether it's RWAs, whether it's AI, whether it's like institutional finance, all that stuff can benefit from multi-DA. And so that's something that we're focused on. We'll be actually making more updates about that next week because we've got more partners onboarding and we've got more integrations that we've already completed there. So that's great. That's where the consistency is on that fundamental infrastructure level, right? In terms of, areas of focus, that's something that we can't necessarily guarantee. And I don't think we should guarantee for longer than 3 to 6 months, right? Because these are all areas where, as an infrastructure project, I don't think our goal is to focus on one particular, at least not for a general purpose L2, to focus on one particular area and continue to support that area. Our goal should be to foster one specific area so that it can grow itself. And once that area is mature enough to grow itself, then we have to focus on other areas as well, because that's the whole point of being general purpose, right? Like you have to be able to address the needs of various different sectors rather than just building on one and focusing on one. And so that's where I think like we continue to shift because we don't know what the next area we're going to focus on will be. It also depends on, what users are looking for at the moment. And so, yeah.
So, you said that you're looking at the meme coin space, right? And and you mentioned even that everyone was talking into the tap economy kind of a thing, where everyone is just flashing that they have, and we're building one of the projects as well. Like we have 35 million. Hamster Combat's saying that they have 270 million users, and their next goal is 1 billion users when there is only 900 million active users in Telegram. All these ambitious numbers and great goals. Of course, there is some portion of bots and some portion of fake users. How fast the blockchain startup, especially the blockchain itself, should be in this space? Should you be running into the Telegram, building a mini app for Manta Network users, attracting all this users' attention? Maybe you're even going into this space.
We shouldn't be because we're core focus is infrastructure, right? But apps should. Right? Like if you're an app that's building Telegram games and stuff, and we do have a few gaming projects that are building these Telegram games on Manta, right? Like I think that's fun, right? But we as a team will probably never say we're going to drop our L2 and start pivoting into Telegram games.
Yeah. Okay, cool. One of the maybe tricky question, if you don't want to answer, that's okay, about Mr. Gensler. What role in your life did he play? What relations did you guys have for the major audience to understand better?
Yeah, so I was Gary Gensler's TA, teaching assistant, when I was studying at MIT, and he was teaching there. And specifically, I was his teaching assistant for his crypto courses, one called Crypto Finance and one called Blockchain Lab. Crypto Finance was a course where we took, different projects, examined their tokens, and thought about the utility behind it, and ultimately asked the question, is this a security? And then in the Blockchain Labs course, we were working with a lot of different large businesses, consultancies in the space that were exploring use cases for blockchain. So this includes places like BCG, Deloitte, Monetary Authority of Singapore, all this other stuff. And they would look into use cases such as supply chain management, CBDCs, and all this other stuff. Ultimately, Gary, especially at that time, was one of the few people I know, and probably the only person I knew, or the person I knew that read the most white papers in this space. And so definitely he would read over everything, very attention to detail. And so that garnered a massive respect for him from me, because I think like this guy definitely wants to understand. I think that he has always, and it's his responsibility as well, right? As as a regulator, to think from the lens of, why is this not a security, or more so, like, why is this a security, right? And so I think like there's been that sort of component to it, which I think has caused a lot of sort of the contention between Gary and the crypto space, and also Gary and the rest of the securities world. But ultimately, right, like him and CZ, and countless other folks actually, but like just seeing these sort of people in the crypto space have been largely inspirational for me, and like what essentially got me into Web3. Because before them, right, like I started off with like Bitcoin mining, because I was running a cloud computing company at the time. I started my first company in cloud computing, and I had to cover the cost of the servers and everything, and so I would do some Bitcoin mining on the side, and I would go to these Bitcoin meetups just to learn more about it. And this was back in like 2013, 2014-ish. And oh my gosh, it was the weirdest, sketchiest people at those meetups. And so I always thought of like crypto as like a really weird, nerdy, outcast space. And, I would write about it, I would blog about it, I would do all these things and just kind of get myself immersed in this space, but I never took it seriously enough. But then when I started seeing all of these really bright minds actually look at it and examine it, it told me essentially, oh, there is a huge opportunity in this space right now. And there's actually something that's coming and it's building, right? And even at the time with Gary teaching the courses, there wasn't really any institutional adoption. But if someone like Gary was examining this in such a serious manner, right, then I mean that's kind of foreshadowing what's to come. And I think like regardless of what position you have on things like, institutional adoption, whether you like it or not, the reality is adoption is adoption. And having those players also take it seriously is a very good sign for the space. And so I think ultimately, right, like that had a huge impact on me. And so seeing that promise is what kind of also drove me here today. Yeah.
About Gary and the regulations, right? Don't you think it's really sounds a bit like, really sounds controversial that Gary is obviously a big fan of blockchain technology, right? Because he was, very deep in this, and he was teaching this, and he was learning this by himself. And now the regulators across the globe, I'm not talking only about the US, are kind of killing the essential meaning of blockchain to be very transparent, absolutely free, and not follow the rules. And blockchain technology now becomes kind of a banking infrastructure in some ways, which will not be having any benefits compared to the regular infrastructures which banks have, except the speed maybe and transparency, and will not have this, true blockchain vibe. I'm not talking about the true blockchain vibe for the crimes, of course. The crime should not be there, right? But still, I mean, don't you feel there is like a controversial kind of a feeling in the for the true blockchain enthusiasts and the regulators now?
Yeah, I think that there is how would you say this? It's like in this discovery process of exactly how blockchain should exist. Currently, we have two sides of the spectrum that are both pretty extreme, and we have to figure out what that middle ground is. We haven't found the middle ground, right? But on the one hand, we have complete degens and derelicts that just say full freedom, full rights. If you get hacked, sucks for you, right? Like if hackers attack you or if you're a scammer, whatever, no one cares. Be a scammer. It's a free economy. And then you have this other side, which is saying crypto is just full of scammers. The only people that use them are money launderers and all this other stuff. And we have to regulate the heck out of them. And they have to look just like JP Morgan and all these other financial institutions, right? And I don't think either side is right. I think that there needs to be some sort of balance because, how can you really scale to 1 billion users? Can we really trust 1 billion users to hold on to their own wallets safely without some sort of financial crimes happening? Like even the people, the early adopters in Web3 right now are getting phished. They're losing their wallets. They're losing their assets. They're losing their private keys, right? And now scale that out to 1 billion people. Like that's not sustainable. So there has to be some type of rules in place, but whether those rules are those rules supposed to be the same rules that we apply to traditional finance? I don't think so, because this is a new technology and it's truly for a global financial infrastructure rather than a country by country financial infrastructure. And so different rules need to be applied. But inevitably, I think there still needs to be a balance between the two. So do I think that we're taking the best and brightest minds to build out these current regulations that would be in the best interest of blockchain? Maybe not currently, but I do think that there needs to be some sort of formula there.
For sure. I think that we don't have the very good regulations and maybe adoption from the regulators worldwide because the industry is so tiny. I mean, the whole cryptocurrency market valuation is compared even less than Nvidia's capitalization, right? So I mean, it's so tiny. It's like very, very small. Do you think like the industry have the potential to become really viewable in the world economy glasses? I mean, will it ever become something like, I don't know, $100 trillion industry? What should happen? We all want this, right? The industry to be bigger, but what should happen in order to this, to these valuations to reach, right?
I think it's inevitable. And the reason is because of some of my past experience. So when I was in the cloud computing space, right, and not to date myself, but I started my cloud computing business back in 2011. And in 2011, the only cloud computing service that was available, or for the most part, was Amazon Web Services. And so at the time, I would go to these conferences about data centers and co-location and all this other server stuff. And the talks that I would listen to in those conferences was, does cloud have a future? And the resounding answer was no. It's only for hobbyist developers or shadow IT who's using like little sandbox environments to experiment with actual real applications that can then get deployed on real servers, right? And now you fast forward to 2024, where we are today. There's no company in existence today that wants to build on a massive scale that doesn't use cloud infrastructure. It's such a critical component to all that. So like, how did we shift from cloud computing is just a bubble and it's never going to work to cloud computing is a critical component of every single business, right? Like that took an industry shift, an industry mindset, and it took the early adopters to bring that over into the institutions that they were already a part of and start growing that effort, growing that mindset from the ground up. And I think I saw that slow evolution play out over the course of 7 years. And then another really interesting phenomenon that I think people tend to forget about is social media, right? Like when MySpace first came out, like all it was about was posting side angles of your profile, looking down and emo and stuff, and like, people complaining about their lives. And then Twitter comes out and I see these articles, these interviews on the news about it, and people just laughing about it, saying, who the heck wants to go look at someone post about their lunch and their daily lives? Like, that's so stupid. I don't know if you remember those.
Of course. I even remember the classmates. I even remember the classmates.com, which I think appeared before MySpace. Yeah.
So all these iterations, right, of social media, were never taken seriously. And it was like, this is just for horny teenagers and college students and, all this other stuff. And now fast forward into 2024 and you put the wrong tweet out, it can ruin your career. It can ruin political relationships. It can tank a stock, right? Like it's a complete.
Oh, it can bring you $1 billion. It can bring you $1 billion, right?
Yes. By spitting into a mic, right? Haktua, right? Like it's so it's so interesting how you see the shift of some emerging technology not being taken seriously into a shift of a technology that is critical for everyday life that can make or break futures, businesses, etc. And I think crypto is headed in that same direction. When we first saw Bitcoin, cypherpunk, stupid money, magic money out of thin air. Who cares, right? Like it has no value. What's it backed by, right? The US dollar is backed by US government, blah, blah, blah. And Bitcoin's backed by nothing, right? How many times have we heard that argument? And now in 2024, no one argues that anymore, right? We see BlackRock investing. We see family funds investing. We see Fidelity. We see Bitcoin on institutional trading apps, right? And so that adoption is happening. Being taken seriously is happening. And so I think in the next decade or even less, right, like this massive adoption is definitely going to be there because the doubters of Bitcoin are no longer necessarily the doubters that they once were, right? Before, the argument was there's no serious backing, it's just fake internet money. Now it's okay, can you still say that? Because BlackRock has just invested a significant portion of their AUM into this. And so there's large players that are betting that it won't fail. And so I think the tides are turning, just like it did in cloud computing, just like it did in social media. So yeah.
Yeah, if there would be a crypto president position, I would vote for you, Kenny. Hopefully it happens soon. About the trend watching. Well, for example, memes were in the space for quite a while, right? So there was Dogecoin and everything, and no one knew that there's going to be a new race or new season for memes this year, right? At least I didn't know about it in the 2023 and the end of the year. Same thing for like mini apps in Telegram again with those huge numbers, and definitely brings attention. I don't know, maybe in my part of the world, maybe you heard of it as well, right? Like, would that be can we talk about the narratives for the next couple of years, or the crypto is not the space where we can, predict something this for that long, right? So we can just know that, probably hopefully meme coins will last till the end of 2024, and that's how long we can predict, right? Or maybe you see what is going to happen, because all the trends and narratives been quite fast. I think not many people are using the NFTs, for example, that much as they used to be a couple of years ago, right? And everyone was building the NFT marketplaces. Same for move to earn kind of a things, right? Maybe people will forget the tap games in a while. Like, how do you see the trend watching in the crypto space, and maybe you see some narratives which will last for long?
Yes, I do have a very based opinion on this. I think it's RWAs. And the reason is because, well, I guess first question is, do you have any NVIDIA stock?
No, I don't.
No, okay. But if okay, I guess can you get NVIDIA stock?
Yeah.
How would you buy NVIDIA stock? Oh, okay. But it's not traded on like any sort of like Russian markets, right? So like
Yeah, I would have to buy it from my foreign account. I would have to buy it from the foreign account of my broker and stuff like this, because I can do so, right? And some of the people cannot do this. Of course, there is a barrier.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that this globalization of finance is the best direction that blockchain is heading, because regardless of whether you jumped into Bitcoin or blockchain in 2008 or 2024, the only proven use case of blockchain is globalized finance, right? That's why decentralized exchanges have the best volume. That's why the key performance metrics in crypto are measured in TVL, total value locked. That's why, global transfer value is still the huge thing in crypto. And, even if you build like a social fi or a game fi, there's always that fi element that drives the success of your game. And so I think finance and global access to finance is the true value proposition that we have found for blockchain at this moment, right? Not saying there won't be others. And so RWAs fit that narrative so well. And on top of that, they drive a new level of adoption, and it's demanded by both the buyers and the sellers. And so, one example is the NVIDIA stock, right? Like right now, NVIDIA, because it's traded on US stock markets, it's currently got a valuation bigger than anyone could have ever possibly imagined NVIDIA to be. What would it look like if NVIDIA had access to the entire world? Right? Like, what if, people from Australia and Southeast Asia and China and all this other stuff can trade directly and get NVIDIA stock and hold ownership of it? What does that imply for the value discovery of NVIDIA? It'd probably be even larger than it currently is. Maybe, I don't know. Don't take my word
for sure. At least, a whole bunch of people, way much more than now, would have access to NVIDIA stocks, right?
Exactly. Yes. And that whole example goes into a much bigger picture of access to liquidity. And I think that's something that a lot of very small markets actually don't have access to. So, for example, if I were to buy a property in a Caribbean island, right, for, I don't know, I don't even know what they go for, but let's say it's a very expensive property, like $10 million. That's pretty expensive, right? So I have to spend $10 million to buy this property on the island, and then 3 years later, I decide I want to sell it. Who the heck on the island is going to buy that property from me? Who the heck am I going to find to buy that property for $10 million, right? Like, it's such a random, specific thing, and I only have a population of 100,000 people to sell to. But now, all of a sudden, if that can be tokenized across the entire globe, right now I have access to 7.2 billion people that could potentially want that property, whether for themselves or fractionalized or whatever it is. And so that access to liquidity is extremely, extremely beautiful for a seller, right? Whether it's a Caribbean property or something else. A lot of markets don't have access to the liquidity that we assume that they do. And so they are looking for more buyers. They are looking for more price discovery. Same with the buyers themselves, right? Like, if I live in Southeast Asia, I can't get into the action of NVIDIA. I want to have some shares in NVIDIA. I can't. I want to have that Caribbean island home, but I can't. I want to have like all these things.
Yeah, and you don't even have to wait. Yeah, and you don't have to, rely on the holidays where the exchanges don't work, for example, or it works from 9 to 5 and all this kind of stuff, right? That's what you're talking about. So
right, exactly. There's no limitations, and it's a global access, and so I think that RWAs is such a critical role in the proof of the value and existence of blockchain. And so I do think like that's probably the next big thing, especially with the way that regulators are looking at blockchain right now. I do think that RWAs are in a good position to grow at this stage. If you came and tried to do RWAs 3 years ago, it would have been such a tough play because every single government was like, no, right? But now governments are like, oh, let's incubate these projects and see where they go.
They say maybe.
Yeah.
If you would be the developer, just the last question, like what would you build now? Seeing, so many blockchains, so many opportunities. What would you do if you would start the, entrepreneurship right now? Or being a developer?
It depends, right? Like I think like different developers have different sort of goals, different sort of mindsets. I think if I was to build something, it would definitely be along financial tooling. I think that there are a lot of operational inefficiencies in traditional finance that can be severely optimized using blockchain. And also, there's a lot of business models and revenue models in traditional finance that have historically been limited only to JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, right? Like if you're those institutions, then you can capture hundreds of millions, if not billions in revenue from those business models every single year, but normal retail can't. But you can take those same exact business models, translate them into the blockchain environment, and give that full access of revenue generation to the actual retail users. And I think that is very powerful as well. And there's a lot of these sort of opportunities that I've brainstormed with other people, that I've seen other people working on, that I don't see people focus on enough because it's not necessarily the sexy trend. But I do think that, once someone unlocks that, it's going to be one of the few use cases that have sustainable, proven revenue growth.
It's like an ugly duck, which needs some time to become the beautiful swan, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I wish everyone could find their own ugly ducks and, grow it and wait a little bit and build the beautiful project like you do. Kenny, thank you so much for this interview. I mean, it's been a pleasure for myself. I think it's been interesting. So you guys, please do comment on. Yeah, thank you so much. You guys comment on this video if it's been helpful and put some questions for Kenny for Manta Network. We'll try to forward those questions. And if you like the video, please put the thumbs up. Thanks, guys.